flood, your grace." The words fell across the south terrace of Ashbourne Park more sharply than the silver tea-knife striking its saucer. Eleanor kept one ungloved finger pressed to the parchment map spread over the weathered stone table. Wind from the Derbyshire hills lifted the corners, but she held the sheet steady while 30 women in lilac, rose, cream and yellow muslin stared as though she had overturned the tea service into the Duke's lap. Edmund, Duke of Ashbourne, stood opposite her in a dark blue coat cut with austere precision. One hand rested beside the proposed tenant cottages, the other remained at his side. He did not look at the women waiting to praise him. He looked at Eleanor. Lady Arabella's painted fan snapped shut. "Miss Eleanor," she said, laughter trembling beneath every syllable. "His Grace has retained the finest surveyor in London. Surely a companion does not presume to understand an estate map better than the Duke of Ashbourne." A murmur of agreement moved through the terrace. Eleanor felt Margaret's woolen shawl folded over her arm, coarse and warm beneath her fingers. She also felt the small brass token sewn inside her sleeve, the mark of the conduct bond attached to her position. She was not merely Margaret's companion. She was paid from a trust administered by Margaret's nephew. The wages included her lodging at the Dower House and the character reference, without which no respectable family would employ an impoverished gentlewoman. If Eleanor were dismissed for impropriety, insubordination, or ambition beyond her station, the final quarter of the bond would be forfeited. She would lose her wages, her rooms, and the only written proof that she had served honourably. Arabella knew it. For 10 days she had been persuading Margaret's trustee that Eleanor had grown impertinent. One more complaint, properly placed, might erase her from Ashbourne before the concluding ball. Eleanor withdrew her finger from the map, but not her gaze from the Duke. "I do not claim to read it better than your Grace," she said. "I claim only that the elevation is wrong." The smiles vanished. She pointed again, this time to the eastern copse. "The ground falls more sharply beyond these trees than the survey records. The soil is clay over shale. If the cottages are built here, winter rain will collect against the north walls. The first hard freeze will split the footings. The tenants will wake with water in their hearths." Lady Arabella stepped closer in blush silk. "Such confidence, such topography," Eleanor replied. A quiet sound came from Julian Mercer, Ashbourne's estate surveyor, who stood at Edmund's right with rolled plans beneath his arm. It might have been a cough. It might have been surprise. Edmund leaned over the map. "Where would you build?" The terrace held its breath. Eleanor traced a line farther west. "Above the old sheep track, the ground is higher and the spring drains south. The women would also be nearer the kitchen gardens and farther from the carriage road." "You have walked it?" "Twice." "Why?" "Because the map did not agree with the rain marks on the stone wall." Julian unrolled the original estate sketch beside the London plan. "The old survey shows a drainage cut here." Eleanor nodded, filled with bramble now, but still visible. The Duke's gaze moved from the old sketch to her face. Lady Arabella smiled too brightly. "How fortunate that Miss Eleanor spends so many hours wandering where guests are unlikely to see her." Eleanor forwarded Margaret's shawl once. "I walk where facts remain unflattered. Silence." Not the soft silence of courtesy, the clean silence that followed truth. Edmund straightened. "Mr. Mercer, we ride to the eastern copse now." Julian gathered the papers. Arabella's colour sharpened. "Surely the luncheon can survive without me." The Duke turned to Eleanor. "You will join us." It was not a command softened into charm. It was a practical request made before witnesses, but Eleanor still understood the danger. "I cannot leave Lady Wexford unattended." From the shaded colonnade, Margaret tapped her walking stick against the stone. I have survived 72 years without drowning in a rose garden, she said. Go and save the cottages. A few women laughed uncertainly. Margaret did not. She extended one gloved hand for her shawl. Eleanor placed it around the dowager's shoulders. As Eleanor followed Julian and the Duke from the terrace, she felt Arabella's gaze burn between her shoulder blades. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted the Palladian columns as she passed them, not to disappear, but to keep her pace steady. By the eastern copse, the London plan had failed before the first horse stopped moving. The land fell into a shallow basin, hidden from the terrace by summer growth. Water from the previous week's storm still glimmered beneath reeds. A line of damp marked the old wall, nearly to Eleanor's knee. Julian dismounted and walked the slope twice. The ridge on the London drawing does not exist, he said. Edmund remained on horseback beside Eleanor. She could not know what he thought, but the leather creaked beneath his tightened hand. Julian crouched by the clay. She is right. The footings would fail. A gust pulled loose a curl at Eleanor's temple. Edmund looked toward the higher sheep track. What would the change cost? Less than rebuilding 30 cottages. Eleanor said. Julian glanced up, then smiled despite himself. Edmund turned his horse. Stop every order attached to the eastern site. We begin a new survey this afternoon. He looked at Eleanor. You prevented a ruin. I pointed to one, and 30 women praised it. 30 women were not asked to live there. The Duke's mouth almost softened. Almost. The first relief came before sunset. A footman brought a written order to the tenant office, suspending construction. Julian sent 2 men to clear the old drainage cut. Margaret received a note confirming Eleanor had accompanied the survey party at the dowager's instruction, preserving both propriety and record. Arabella received nothing. That did not stop her. At breakfast the next morning, Eleanor found Margaret's trustee letter open beside the marmalade. Miss Eleanor's recent conduct has attracted notice. Any further breach of her proper duties may require reconsideration of her bond and position. Margaret read the sentence twice, and she pushed the letter across the table. Arabella visited my nephew's wife yesterday. Eleanor folded a page. There will be another complaint. There will be 30. Margaret's blue eyes remained sharp beneath white brows. Would you leave if dismissed? With no character? Margaret's mouth tightened. There was the second lock on Eleanor's life. Money could be replaced slowly. Reputation, once stained by a titled woman's accusation, became a locked door in every house where paid companionship was respectable enough to be cruel. I will answer my nephew, Margaret said. Not yet. Eleanor. If you defend me before there is proof of misconduct, Arabella will claim I have manipulated you. Margaret tapped the table. You speak as if honesty were a musket best fired only once. It is all the ammunition I possess. The library at Ashbourne smelled of beeswax, old vellum, and dried lavender swept into the hearth. Its doors stood open to the gallery. Margaret occupied the chair nearest the fire with her embroidery. Julian worked at the survey table beneath the windows. 2 footmen moved in and out carrying rolled maps, ensuring that no whisper could transform Eleanor's work into impropriety. Edmund stood opposite the small desk, where she copied Margaret's correspondence. You were correct, he said. Eleanor set down her pen. Julian confirmed it. I rode the entire drainage line this morning. Rain darkened one shoulder of his blue coat. He removed his riding gloves and placed them on the desk. Damp leather, cold air, and horse followed him into the lavender warmth. The clay extends farther south than the old map shows, he continued. The London surveyor never walked beyond the copse. Then he drew what he expected to find, and charged me for what he did not. Julian looked up from the original invoice. Twice, apparently. He crossed the room and laid 2 accounts beside Eleanor's paper. One billed Ashbourne for the site survey. The second, buried under architectural consultation, contained the same sum. Eleanor moved both invoices toward the light. The dates are 6 weeks apart. The same hand approved them. Julian said. Deputy Steward Cresswell. Eleanor examined the ink. The first charge had been entered in a broad brown hand. The second was narrower, darker, and compressed at the ends of the lines. This is not the same writer. Edmund pulled a chair to the far side of the desk, leaving the space between them clear. How can you tell? The first clerk leaves room for pence. The second crowds the margin because he copied the total before copying the description. Julian brought the estate ledger. Eleanor compared the entries. 3 drainage invoices, 2 sets of timber, 1 survey never performed. The practical reason for Edmund's attention sharpened around the books. He had inherited an estate praised by everyone who profited from his ignorance. Eleanor had seen 1 false hill. Now the ledgers suggested an entire landscape of them. What do you need? He asked. Original receipts, tenant statements, the deputy steward's dispatch book. Julian nodded. I can obtain the receipts. Not openly, Eleanor said. If Cresswell knows we are comparing the accounts, he will correct the evidence before we reach it. Edmund's gaze held hers. What do you recommend? Let the cottage redesign appear to be the only issue. Ask him to prepare a new cost estimate. While he is occupied, Julian should copy the dispatch book. Margaret's needle paused. That sounds remarkably like strategy. Eleanor looked toward the fire. It sounds like survival. Edmund turned to Julian. Do it. Then he looked down at Eleanor's hands. The library grate had burned low. Her fingers had grown pale around the pen. Without comment, he crossed to the hearth, placed another log over the embers, and opened the brass vent. Heat rose slowly through the room. He did not make kindness a spectacle. He returned to the table and pushed the estate ledger toward her. Will you audit the southern fields as well? Under what authority? Written. Paid? Yes. With Margaret present or the doors open? Yes. And my companion's wages remain separate from estate work? Yes. Margaret gave an approving sniff. Julian concealed a smile behind a map. Edmund took up a clean sheet and wrote the terms before Eleanor touched the ledger. That evening, Margaret's nephew received a copy. The bond could not be forfeited for duties Ashbourne had formally requested and documented. Arabella's first weapon had met paper stronger than gossip. By the end of the second week, the southern fields had yielded another truth. Cresswell's rotation plan demanded wheat from land already exhausted by grain. Eleanor spread the crop maps across the library table while rain struck the windows. Clover here, she said, pointing to the lower strip. Turnips after harvest on the north parcel. Leave the western edge fallow and graze sheep there before spring. Edmund poured tea from the black pot. No sugar. It conceals weak tea. And weak opinions? Those require stronger measures. He placed her cup beside the map. Margaret laughed from the hearth. Julian leaned over the field reports. The tenants asked for clover 2 years ago. Cresswell denied it. Edmund said Eleanor found the petition tied beneath a packet of hunting accounts, unread or hidden. She laid it beside the false survey invoice. Your tenants did not fail to speak, Your Grace. Someone ensured you did not hear. The fire shifted. Edmund did not answer at once. He opened the petition, read every signature, then wrote an order suspending winter arrears on the southern farms until the rotation could be corrected. A kept promise followed the next morning. The order went out under seal. By afternoon, 2 tenant women arrived at the estate office to confirm the clover seed allocation. One brought a jar of preserved plums for Margaret. The other left a small twist of lavender beside Eleanor's ledger. For the woman who read the rain marks, Eleanor placed it between the pages of the new cottage plan. Domestic intimacy gathered in practical things. A chair angled toward the library fire before she arrived. A candelabrum shifted so its light fell across the margins instead of her eyes. Edmund's riding gloves drying near the grate, while Julian argued with a drainage calculation. 2 cups of tea without sugar. Margaret's woolen shawl folded over the back of Eleanor's chair. They did not speak of love. They spoke of receipts, roofs, turnips, culverts, and the strange arrogance of London men who invented hills from drawing rooms. One morning, Edmund placed a small brass room beside Eleanor's map. The one in the survey room is warped. She tested the edge against the parchment. Useful. I had hoped for overwhelming gratitude. You should have brought a straight wool sooner. Julian laughed aloud. Edmund's expression remained grave for precisely 2 seconds. Then the winter in it cracked. Arabella saw the change. Her campaign sharpened. At Tuesday tea, the chairs around the drawing room hearth closed before Eleanor returned with Margaret's heavy shawl. Rose, cream, and lilac formed a perfect circle. No place remained for the companion. Arabella lifted her cup. The morning room is quiet. Miss Eleanor, better suited to those who prefer accounts to society. Heat climbed Eleanor's throat. She tightened her hold on Margaret's shawl. 1, 2, 3. Before she could answer, Margaret struck her cane against the carpet. My companion sits with me. There is no chair, Arabella said sweetly. Eleanor looked toward the footman. Please do not trouble yourself. Then she crossed to the writing desk, lifted a straight-back chair herself, and carried it into the circle. She set it beside Margaret. I require no one else's place. The room stilled. Only then did Edmund rise. He moved his own carved chair half a pace aside, widening the space between the Duke and the Dowager. Miss Eleanor, he said, Julian tells me your field rotation may restore 12 acres before spring. Will you explain it? Eleanor sat by her own decision. The wheat has exhausted the southern strip. Clover will restore the ground and feed the sheep. Arabella's teacup trembled. Edmund remained standing until Eleanor and Margaret were settled. Then he resumed his seat, not shielding Eleanor from the room so much as forcing the room to hear her. The relief came in dry wit. 3 lumps. Lady Arabella? Eleanor asked when the sugar bowl reached her. Arabella's mouth tightened. 4. Then the tea must be very weak indeed. Margaret coughed into her napkin. Even Edmund looked down to hide the brief movement of his mouth. The danger arrived through handwriting, 3 days before the concluding ball. Eleanor returned Annie to the library and found Arabella beside her desk. The open estate ledger lay between them. Arabella held a discarded practice page in one hand, the sheet upon which Eleanor had copied drainage figures before transferring them cleanly. What are you doing? Arabella turned with a smile. Admiring your precision. Her maid stood near the archive door, eyes fixed on the floor. Margaret was not yet present. Julian had gone to the tenant's office. The footman had stepped into the gallery for a call. Eleanor crossed the room. That page belongs to the estate audit. Then you should guard it better. Arabella folded the sheet. Eleanor held out her hand. Return it for one breath. Arabella's smile faltered. Then footsteps sounded in the gallery. She dropped the page beside the ledger. Do not be dramatic. She left with her maid. Eleanor examined the paper. A faint smear of violet ink marked the lower corner. Arabella used violet ink for personal correspondence. The first clue. That afternoon, Julian brought a dispatch ledger from Cresswell's office. The false survey charges were written on paper watermarked with a small crown and the initials B and H. Eleanor saw the same watermark on the page Arabella had handled. Ashbourne, writing paper. The second clue lay in the maid's apron. A narrow violet stain darkened one pocket as she passed Eleanor in the west corridor. Eleanor said nothing. Not yet. She copied the watermarks, dates, and hand differences into her private audit book. Margaret signed the page. Julian witnessed it. Then the real threat was sprung. Arabella entered Edmund's anteroom the following morning, carrying a crumpled letter. Eleanor heard her voice from the portrait gallery. Miss Eleanor has written to a London solicitor. She boasts that you are entirely managed and that his settlement will soon reward her. Margaret stood beside Eleanor. Julian approached from the opposite end of the gallery, with the original receipts beneath his arm. Eleanor's stomach tightened. The forged letter struck precisely where Arabella intended. Edmund's title, his fortune, and the old betrayal every houseguest had been whispering around for 3 weeks. Margaret reached for Eleanor's elbow. Eleanor shook her head. No, I will answer it. She entered the anteroom. The doors remained open. Arabella stood beside the desk in blush silk. Her maid waited behind her, pale enough to reveal fear before anyone spoke. Edmund had not touched the letter. Eleanor stopped before the desk. That page is forged. Arabella gave a wounded laugh. Of course you would say so. Eleanor looked at Edmund, then at Julian and Margaret. I ask that it be examined before witnesses. Edmund stepped back from the desk. The examination is yours. Eleanor unfolded the letter. The first line copied her hand well enough to deceive anyone who had never watched her write. The second did not. She placed her practice page beside it. My letters lean slightly left. This leans right whenever the writer reaches the end of a line. I form the capital A in 2 strokes. The forgery uses 3. Arabella's fan stopped moving. Eleanor held both pages toward the light. The paper carries Ashbourne's B and H watermark. I do not use estate stationery for private letters. Julian placed Cresswell's dispatch sheet beside them. The same stock, he confirmed. Eleanor pointed to the violet smear near the forged signature. Lady Arabella handled my practice page yesterday while carrying violet ink. Her maid has the same ink upon her apron. Every gaze turned toward the young woman. Arabella's voice sharpened. Do not be absurd. She writes my invitations. The maid began to cry, not loudly. One tear slid down her cheek while her hands twisted together. Eleanor looked at her. What were you promised? Arabella stepped between them. She was promised nothing. The maid whispered, a position in London. Arabella went still. The girl looked toward Margaret. My lady told me to copy Miss Eleanor's hand. She said the Duke would believe any accusation about money. The room held only the faint hiss of the hearth. Eleanor folded the forged letter. You endangered my character, my bond, and my livelihood because I contradicted a map. Arabella lifted her chin. Because you forgot what you are. No, Eleanor said. I remembered exactly what I am. A paid companion, an estate auditor, a woman whose name is not yours to spend. She turned to Edmund. The evidence is complete. Only then did he speak. Lady Arabella, your guardian will receive the forged page, the maid's statement, and the witness record. You will leave Ashbourne Park today. Arabella's face lost colour. You would destroy me for her. No, Eleanor answered before Edmund could. You did this for yourself. Margaret instructed the footman to escort the maid to the housekeeper's room, where her statement could be taken without Arabella's presence. Julian sealed the forged page inside the audit packet. Arabella left before luncheon, not because the Duke threatened to close every London door, because evidence had opened the right one. The maid received no London position. She did receive wages owed and a reference describing her truthful confession after coercion. Arabella's guardian removed her from the remainder of the season and paid restitution into Margaret's conduct trust for the attempted damage to Eleanor's character. Eleanor's bond was released from discretionary control. Her reference could no longer be withdrawn by Margaret's nephew without evidence heard by the trustees. The third path became ink 2 days before the ball. In the library, with Margaret by the hearth, Julian at the map table, and Ashbourne's solicitor beside the open doors, Eleanor read a new employment agreement. 1 year as estate planning clerk and tenant account advisor. Salary paid in her own name. Independent rooms in a respectable house belonging to Margaret's widowed cousin. A professional reference guaranteed. Whether Eleanor resigned, completed the year, or refused every private invitation issued by the Duke. Authority over the new cottage plans, southern rotation records, drainage accounts, and the companion relief fund Margaret had proposed after Arabella's attack. No marriage, no personal obligation. Eleanor read each line twice. If I leave Ashbourne after the ball, the contract remains yours to accept or refuse, the solicitor said. If I accept the work and later decline His Grace's acquaintance, your wages and rooms remain unchanged. Edmund stood near the far window. He did not approach the table until Eleanor signed. Is it satisfactory? He asked. I added a clause requiring tenant women to be consulted before cottage kitchens are designed. Julian looked offended. I had included kitchens. You included doors, walls, and a square marked stove. The stove is generally found in a kitchen. A woman carrying water in winter may prefer to say where. Margaret smiled over her embroidery. Edmund turned to Julian. Consult the women. Julian bowed to Eleanor. I surrender. The kept promise arrived before sunset. 3 tenant wives met Julian at the western site and altered the wellpath washhouse position and kitchen windows. Eleanor watched their recommendations enter the official plan in ink. For once, honesty had not cost her security. It had purchased better walls for women who would never know how close they had come to flooded hearths. The concluding ball opened beneath 1,000 candles. Beeswax warmed the air. Hothouse roses climbed the columns. Pastel gowns filled the ballroom, though fewer women now praised the Duke's every breath with the same confidence. Eleanor stood near the terrace doors in midnight blue, not hidden, waiting. Her contract rested in the library safe. Her new rooms were ready. Her wages and reference belonged to her, regardless of what happened beneath the chandeliers. Edmund stood across the ballroom in formal black. The orchestra finished a country dance. He did not cross the room. He waited. Eleanor looked toward the south terrace beyond the glass, where the first challenge had begun over a map, and 30 shocked faces. 1, 2, 3, 4. The Palladian columns glowed beneath lanterns. Then Eleanor stepped away from the drapes. The crowd noticed. Margaret did first, her woolen shawl silver in the candlelight. Julian stood beside her with the revised cottage map rolled beneath one arm. Eleanor crossed the ballroom under her own power. When she reached Edmund, she spoke before he could offer his hand. My wages, reference, and rooms are secure, whether I remain at Ashbourne or leave tomorrow. They are. My work will not become courtship merely because we share a ledger. No, the tenant plans remain mine to challenge when they are wrong. Especially then. A faint warmth entered his face. Eleanor heard whispers stir behind her. She did not turn. Knowing all of that, she said, I choose to hear what you wish to ask. Only then did Edmund open his hand. Eleanor, will you permit me to court you? The room went quiet. She placed her gloved fingers in his. Yes. He bowed and pressed one brief kiss to her knuckles. Nothing more. Then he looked toward the orchestra. Will you dance with me? Eleanor glanced at the terrace, the waiting guests, and the blue sleeve covering a hand that no longer trembled. I will. They entered the country dance, not as duke and dependent, not as rescuer and rescued, as two people whose first intimacy had been disagreement honestly given. The courtship lasted through the 4th week. Edmund called at Eleanor's new rooms under Margaret's eye. Eleanor continued the estate audit. Julian completed the corrected elevation. Cresswell was removed after the duplicate invoices and hidden tenant petitions were placed before the estate trustees. The reclaimed funds paid for drainage, clover seed, and the first phase of the western cottages. Margaret established a small trust offering temporary rooms, paid references, and legal advice to companions dismissed without character. Eleanor wrote its first operating rules and refused to name it after herself. Why not? Margaret demanded. because desperate women require a door, not a monument. By the first frost, the eastern copse remained empty. The new cottages stood on high ground above the sheep track, their kitchens facing morning light and their well paths shortened at the women's request. Smoke rose from the first two chimneys, while rain moved harmlessly through the restored southern drain. In Ashbourne's library, before the solicitor, Margaret and Julian, Eleanor read the proposed marriage settlement. Her salary and professional reference remained independent. Her rooms and income could not be absorbed into the ducal household. She retained authority over estate maps, tenant accounts, and the Companion Relief Trust. No Ashbourne money would settle private debts in exchange for consent. Eleanor added one clause: the Duchess of Ashbourne may publicly contradict the Duke whenever the land, accounts, or truth require it. Julian coughed so violently that Margaret offered him water. Edmund read the sentence. Necessary, he said. Eleanor signed. Only then did he step away from the papers and offer his hand. May I ask again? You may, Eleanor. Will you marry me? She crossed the space between them before placing her fingers in his. Yes. The wedding was small. The practical future was not. In early spring, Eleanor returned to the south terrace, wearing the sensible blue day gown in which she had first contradicted him. The silver thread that one cuff had faded. She kept it anyway. The revised map lay beneath her hand. Beyond the Palladian columns, lavender edged the restored path. Tenant children ran between the high ground cottages. Southern fields showed the first green clover beneath a pale sky. 2 cups of tea waited beside the vellum. No sugar. Edmund came to the table with his old riding gloves tucked beneath one arm. Julian followed with another survey. Eleanor looked at the new line drawn across the northern meadow. It will flood. Your Grace. Edmund stopped. Margaret, seated near the terrace fire basket with her woolen shawl, laughed before he could answer. He leaned over the map. Show me. Eleanor placed her finger upon the truth. This time, no one gasped. Ashbourne had learned to listen before the rain arrived. The end. Stay a little longer beside the fire, where Eleanor's corrected map rests beside 2 cups of unsweetened tea, and lavender dries between the pages of the estate ledger. Which moment stayed with you most? The 31st woman telling the Duke his cottages would flood, Eleanor proving the forged letter false, or the moment she crossed the final ballroom and chose courtship on her own terms? Flattery reflects what power wishes to hear, but truth builds a home that can survive the storm. Share your thoughts below and subscribe. The kettle is always on.